Okay. So, as we said, today we're going to talk about work experience opportunities and how to maximize whatever opportunities you can get at the moment. So, let's start. This is a slightly funny slide. This is the expectation of your work experience is, you're going to get some hands-on clinical experience, seeing some stuff in a hospital or in some sort of healthcare setting, maybe even more so in the context of what's happened in the past 12 months. The reality is that you might end up with a much more passive experience. I think particularly with what can be delivered for you with work experience at the moment, might not be quite the same as having an in-person work experience opportunity. There's a real danger that you're going to end up with quite a passive experience. It's difficult for you to get involved and ask lots of questions. So you might end up feeling like a bit of a houseplant, which isn't quite ideal. So what I wanted to talk about was how regardless of the opportunities that you get, how you can avoid feeling like a houseplant. So we'll talk about, the current work experience opportunities that are available to you in the context of the current pandemic. The kind of themes that you need to be looking at in all these opportunities for work experience, and also how to make them useful for your medical school application and your interviews. And the name of the game is going to be with reflection. You can see on the side here, there are two websites I've got here, which are really, really handy, I would say, in terms of resources for work experience. And I've drawn on a lot of information from them, particularly for what to do in the context of the current pandemic. One is called MedMentor, which have a really handy super hub on their page in the top right corner, which gives a lot of resources for a lot of themes relating to medical school applications, but particularly for medical and non-medical work experience. The aspiring medics also have quite a useful page as well. And just saying, Julia, yes, this webinar is being recorded, but we will release the recordings after about 1 to 2 weeks' time. Apart from what I've mentioned here, is there anything else that anyone wants me to cover during this webinar? Just type in the chat for me. Okay. Okay, yeah. So we'll be talking about multidisciplinary teams, specific examples, where exactly we can find work experience and how to do that, what to do if you've only done one online in work experience. Main theme. So interview themes we might not have a chance to talk about this time, Julia. The main focus of this webinar is about work experience. But all of the other themes you've asked about there. So we can talk about what you might be asked about in interviews regarding work experience, what to expect, and a bit about the wider multidisciplinary team. We can talk about all of those things. So, what is work experience? So tell me, what is work experience? Yeah, so it is, Alicia. So it's about getting an insight into different professions. So this is what I think about when we talk about work experience. So yes, it's about gaining experience of the of the working world, but really it's about demonstrating your understanding of what work involves, in your personal experience, and the kind of skills and attributes you need to be successful, particularly in medicine, in terms of providing a service or providing care to others. So you need a bit of understanding to the challenges and realities of working in a healthcare or caring profession. You need an understanding of the values of the attitudes, behaviors, and skills you need that are essential to being a healthcare professional, particularly a doctor. And as I said, realistic understanding of the challenges faced through medical training, which can be gained from talking to people during work experience. It is quite a wide term. It does cover healthcare work experience placements in hospital. It also covers volunteer work that can be done with a variety of organizations, both healthcare and non-healthcare related. Can cover paid employment. I think the really important thing, I'm seeing a lot of you out saying on the chat about how to talk about the skills gained from this experience, is it's about what you've learned about with the NHS, with your work experience, not just what you've done. So it's really about reflecting on what you've seen, what you've come across from your experience, and what it's taught you. That's what people are looking for when looking at your application form for medical school and looking at your interviews. So things were a lot easier, well, technically a lot easier before the current pandemic. If I was giving this webinar about 12 months ago, first things I would have told you to do is get in contact with your local GP practice or get in touch with your hospital. GPs would usually be quite willing to have students for periods of shadowing in their primary care practice at your local GP. And a lot of local hospitals would run some degree of annual work experience themes, usually between around August and December every year, aimed at both year 12 and primarily year 12, but also year 13 students as well. And that would give you a varied exposure to different specialties within medicine, and also seeing different healthcare professionals as well. Alongside this, a lot of medical schools would have an expectation of some form of volunteering, at least for 6 months, but ideally for 12 months. And this, as you can see, could be in a variety of different settings. And I think the important thing is, this can, while a lot of the healthcare settings may be things that you'd apply for and set up to do during your sixth form years, a lot of organizations that you may be involved with from your childhood and onwards, so things like scouts, guides, army cadets, air cadets, would all count as youth groups as well, that could factor into your volunteering, and you'd be able to show the same skills, of taking care of others, mentorship, that you would in any of these other organizations on the list. Paid employment does also count as well, so being involved in customer service and catering and things like that was also fair game. I talk about all these different schemes because, yes, things are very different now compared to 12 months ago, but some of these things still apply. Jay, I'm seeing quite a lot of your questions. So yeah, well, so from being in a youth group, the big skills would be things like caring. So if you're an older member of the group, mentorship for younger people, particularly in organizations such as Scouts and Guides, as you become a more senior member of the group, is really vital. It shows that caring and compassion. It shows a compassionate and caring nature, and shows those skills that you're developing. Things are a lot trickier after COVID. Things are also changing, month to month as well. And I think particularly with a lot of you being in year 12, rather than, 2/3 of you being in either in year 12 or looking at applying for medicine entry in 2022, there are still a lot of opportunities on this previous slide, if I go back to it, that you can explore. I think it would be appropriate to talk to your local GP, find out about local hospital work experience themes for 2021, because it is likely that, hopefully as things open up and, depending on the current circumstances in terms of vaccinations and the like, that hospitals may try and open up what they were doing previously again, and GPs may try and get students in. I know that some GPs might still be trying to get sixth form students involved in terms of having local virtual work experience. So trying to get, trying to have you, if not directly in clinical telephone calls with patients, trying to have, trying to have calls with you during the week and just answering general questions in terms of what their healthcare role is like. I think it really is really important to think about activities that you do already, particularly that would fit into the volunteering side, that show your positive attributes, which we'll talk about, that show that you are developing the right skill set to be a competent and good doctor. Other things to think about are virtual volunteering and virtual work experience, which I think a few of you have done already, but we can talk about in the ensuing slides as well. I can see a lot of questions in the chat. I think what we'll do is once we finish these slides, I'll go through the chat questions and I'll answer all of the relevant questions that I can. If there's any less relevant questions, not directly relating to this talk today, I will skip over them, but try to answer them at the end if we can, if we have time. So, virtual work experience. So here are 3 main examples of virtual work experience. I can hear, a few people have mentioned having gone through these already. And if you can just tell me in the chat what you thought of the BSMS virtual work experience and the Observe GP, I think that would be really handy for everyone else who maybe hasn't done these, who hasn't taken part in these already. So the Observe GP, Brighton and Sussex Medical School virtual work experience give online insight into secondary care for the BSMS and into primary care, so general practice for Observe GP. They give an idea of work in different medical specialties or work into general practice and what a typical day would involve for such healthcare practitioners. They're both quite good opportunities for going through for getting an insight into day-to-day NHS work, skills that are needed, and general themes, and are good opportunities for reflecting on. Another online course that I found was by the King's Fund, found on the Future Learn website, which is called the NHS Explained. It is a relatively long course, but it gives a really good insight into the challenges facing the NHS and insight into the NHS structure. So for someone that was asking about the NHS challenges, I think this would be quite a good starting point for you to answer your question. This would be quite a good course. So the really important thing is, where possible with these virtual work experiences, within the realms of interactivity, do try and ask lots of questions. That's probably the most useful thing you can get from work experiences, is asking lots of questions. And I think if these online opportunities don't give you that ideal opportunity, but you still have questions about a career in medicine, it might be sensible to to email or get in touch with your local GP to answer things that might not be able to be answered by these interactive experiences. I can see that question, Elena, about how you spin a generic experience to be unique to you, and I will come to that near the end of the presentation. That's going to be the ultimate trouble with all these virtual work experiences, is that everyone in this chat and everyone applying to medical school is going to be watching exactly the same videos and seeing the exact same things. So it's really important that you that you're able to reflect and pick out specific examples, because actually it doesn't matter that every single person has seen the same thing. What people are looking for in your application and interview is what you've learned, and you might have learned different things, and that's fine, but it's what you've learned and reflected on, and how strongly you reflected on what you've learned. We will come to that, what you've asked me at near the end of these slides. So, themes. So these are the kind of things that generally you're going to be looking at in work experience opportunities that you get, whether in person or virtually. So looking at NHS roles, which I'll come to on the next slide, but also about skills that are required from being to be a medical professional. So what sort of skills can you think, if you just type in the chat, that you may see that are needed from a future doctor or healthcare professional? Yep. So I think you've all pretty much covered everything that I thought about. So you can see the list that I've come up there. And so these are really good themes to think about when you're watching these work experience examples. The reason I mention this is that quite often these are useful pointers to pick out examples of that you can reference when writing your personal statement. And quite often as well, and with your volunteering as well. And quite often in your interviews, you might get an example, a question you might get asked is, tell me an example of a situation where you've shown empathy. Tell me an example where you've shown leadership or communication or problem solving. It's really useful to have these headings in the back of your mind when you're going through these experiences, when you're volunteering and when you're doing work experience, so that you can try and pick out, this was a really, what I did here was a good example of X or Y. You can just keep that in the bank for the future, for your application and for your interviews, as a really strong example of one of these skill sets, showing that you're starting to develop these skills as a future doctor. And then, you will see the themes of the current challenges of working in the NHS. I think with the second wave of the coronavirus pandemic, in all facets of the National Health Service, there is a significant amount of pressure, both from patients who are COVID positive and from patients who do not have COVID-related illness, but have problems, have other healthcare problems, which may or may not have had, who may not had their healthcare delayed in March, when obviously things were shut down much more severely than they are at the moment. There is also significant issues of burnout with NHS staff, from people who've been working through the first wave of the pandemic, and significant issue, and combined with significant staff illness as well because of COVID-19 at the moment. So it is a very challenging time to be working in the NHS at the moment, as as someone who is a frontline healthcare worker at the moment. So healthcare roles. So during your virtual work or physical work experience, you will also have an opportunity to interact, to speak to talk to see a variety of roles of healthcare workers that work in the hospital. I mean, apart from medics, can you type in the chat of other healthcare workers that you can think of? Yeah, there's a good list going through here, I can see. Oh, nice engagement as well. I'm glad. Thanks. Yeah. So here's a list. This is not the be all and end all. You go on the NHS careers website. There's about 100 to 200 different roles. Definitely. And I think during your work experience, hopefully you'll get some exposure to different healthcare roles as well, and what healthcare roles and what they involve. And they'll give you a better idea of, you know, interprofessional and team working within the National Health Service, which is really important. You've got lots of people working, you know, working between different roles with different skill sets. And I think an important thing, you know, an important thing to recognize is that, you know, is that we're moving away from the stereotype in the 19, you know, from 40, 30, even 20 years ago, where, you know, the doctor or medic was always the leader, into a flattened hierarchy of leadership, which I think is the right way to go as well. You know, every single healthcare role in this list, and this isn't even, as I said, a comprehensive list of different NHS healthcare workers. Everyone here has a different specialty and different specialist role, and it's really important that we can listen to each other, so that everyone can contribute to a holistic and patient-centered care, and everyone can contribute to help push people's care forward as best as we can. So virtual volunteering. So here's a few examples of different virtual volunteering organizations to get involved with. You can see with a lot of these, the themes are around companionship services, particularly to vulnerable or older adults. So this can include Re-engage, Age UK, the Silver Line, although the Silver Line are currently closed for applications. But these all involve, you know, providing telephone conversations, so 2 to 4 times a month to vulnerable adults, to provide, you know, compassion and support to people, particularly in the context of adults who are going to be more isolated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Another example is the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Project, which runs in local, you know, on a local basis, but involves connecting people together to likewise help people who are self-isolating or more vulnerable with things such as groceries or even social support, much like Re-engage and Age UK. The Crisis Project is also an interesting organisation, and it involves you taking the time to write some letters either to care home residents or to key workers to try and help boost their morale. So these are some, you know, some good examples in lieu of in-person volunteering of alternative volunteering experience that you can get that can help you develop the same sorts of skills that you would be getting in person, which is namely some experience in a forward-facing role involving direct communication and a degree of caring, compassion, and empathy for others, and it would help you to develop those direct skills. So we'll finish by talking about reflection, and then once we've done that, I will go through from the beginning, and I'll just try and answer all the questions that have been answered in chat already. If you've got any other questions at the moment, just feel free to pop them into the chat, and I'll try and get to them at the end of this presentation. So reflection. So this is going to be the key differentiator that will particularly if everyone is having very similar experiences of work experience, will help show the difference between someone who was passive, who was passively watching and perhaps not particularly learning or taking everything in, versus the person that was actively listening and thinking about what they were seeing on the screen and what they could learn. Reflection is about a critical analysis of the experiences that you've had, challenging your assumptions and considering how you would improve yourself, how you would develop your skill set further, or what you've learned essentially. So I've got two links here that I think are really useful. The General Medical Council has quite a good, quite a good guidance for medical students and doctors on reflection. And I think that's really handy to read in your position. There's also quite a really good introduction, really good introduction from the University of Portsmouth about reflective writing as well, which I've referenced on the next couple of slides. And I would recommend reading both of these as well. If you just Google reflective writing introduction, Portsmouth University, or the second title from the GMC, you should be able to find them quite easily on the internet. So here's some examples of reflections that I've just written. So here's example number one. You just have a read of that for me. And just tell me in the chat, what do you think of this? What do you think of this reflection? Is it good? Could it be done better?
So that's pretty straightforward. 2 marks, nice and easy. So they can sometimes be a little bit hard to spot, especially when they're like really at the end of one phase, almost in the next phase, a little bit more difficult. So for example, it wouldn't be much later, they'd start to lose their V shape and become more straight, and you might start to see a bit of a nuclear envelope. And then you'd say it's in the telophase. So this is quite late anaphase, I would say. But it's definitely something anaphase, not telophase, because it's the V-shaped chromosomes.
Oh, sorry about that. We just had someone unmuted themselves. So let's compare this to this one. So this is example number 2. So tell me what you think of this one. So bear in mind, these are both quite relatively short examples, but admittedly in your personal statements, you will struggle to have, a lot of time to write a significant amount. And I think the important thing here is it doesn't matter, in the context of the course, it doesn't really matter about, how much surgery you've seen or all the different things you've seen. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't matter too much. What is really important is what you've learned from your work experience about. Yeah, exactly. I think as Manala said, it's about what you've learned from your work experience rather than what you've seen. So it doesn't matter about all the surgeries that you've seen on your work experience, but it's about, the specifics of, having a degree of active participation and what you've picked, perhaps the non-medical aspects that you've picked up from watching the team. That's much more important. It shows awareness for what you understand is important in a career in healthcare to provide good patient care, much more than the first example, for sure. So that was everything that I had in terms of my slides. These are a few of my sources, which I'll keep up so that you can pop these into Google, just make sure these work. As I said, MedMentor was really handy for having, examples of different work experiences in the current climate. The Aspiring Medics as well was very good as well. Please do type in any questions that you've got. Keep typing them in. I'm now going to start from, I'm just going to come back to the first slide, and I'm going to start from the top of the chat and just work my way down and just go through all the questions one by one. If you feel I haven't completely answered your question, if you just drop me a message and let me know, and I can come back to it. So we've talked about multidisciplinary teams, Niall, but I know someone else has asked about it anyway. So Asya has asked about where to find work experience, but most places are suspended. I'm hoping that during this webinar, we've talked about not just things that you can do locally, particularly for next calendar year for work experience, things might open up, but for now, next 3 to 6 months, what you can, who you can ask regarding work experience. Main themes during interviews, Julia, you've asked. So I think regarding work experience, Julia, as I've said, people, they're not going to ask, they're going to ask you for examples of things that you've seen. So tell me an example of teamwork you've seen. Tell me an example of leadership. Tell me an example of empathy or good communication. Those are the sort of questions you're going to get during interviews. So from your work experience, it's really important to have some ideas of experiences you've got that would fit nicely into those boxes. So that's a really important thing to think about before your interviews. Jay, one of your questions was about, what if you've done only one online experience and I'm in year 13? I think in the context of everything going on, I think that universities will have a degree of concession for people having different amounts of work experience. I'm hoping with this webinar, this gives you some ideas of other virtual work experience that you can do. But the most important thing isn't really the quantity, it's the quality and what you've gained from your work experience. So I hope that helps. Manal, how do we relate work experience and interview questions? I'm hoping that I've answered that. How to talk with working with people with learning disabilities. I don't think that question's particularly related to this webinar, so I'm going to skip that one over. Getting an insight into professions. Likewise, Alicia, I think that's less relevant. I think that's a long question to answer. It was covered in one of our previous webinars. I think I'm going to struggle to answer that question. Then Jay, talking about skills gained during these experiences phrased in a good way. Hopefully we've answered a bit of that when talking through reflection. Asya, you've asked how to explain to email hospitals and places for work experience in general, as in what you say. So the first question is who to email. So in the context of primary care, it's probably sensible to email a practice manager at your local practice. There should be contact details on your GP's website. Within the hospital, there usually is someone within the medical education department who will be responsible for organising work experience students. It's probably worth talking to someone therefore in medical education through your switchboard and getting some contact details through there. In terms of what you say, I think it's just explaining that you're a student in year 11, 12, 13, or whatever stage you're at, who is interested in applying for medicine and looking to partake in some work experience, whether in person or virtually, and what they'd be able to offer at the moment. So saying something to that degree, I think it would be more than appropriate. Jay, we've spoken about some of the challenges in the NHS at the moment, but I'm hoping the King's Fund video will give you some more answers to that. You've asked what skills do you gain from being as part of a youth group. We've covered that. And likewise, being in the Army Cadets would help with that as well. I think the important thing with volunteering is it's not just about the volunteering itself, but it's about the length of time. It shows a degree of commitment as well. So doing something, at least for 6 or 12 months is handy. But some of the other organisations we've talked about, like such as Scouts and Guides, are things that people may have been doing for several years, which shows a degree of commitment as well and discipline. Madhav, you've asked about the St. John's Ambulance. The St. John's Ambulance is a volunteer service of first responders. You're not a trained paramedic. You are a volunteer. You are a volunteer first responder that would traditionally help out with local events. So quite often, say with Guy Fawkes or big festival events, you'd have a presence there, providing first aid to people. So that's St. John's Ambulance. Asya, where can we find virtual work experience? We've answered that question. Elena, how do you spin a general virtual experience to be unique to you? We've answered that question in terms of reflection and what you gain from it in terms of your interviews. Madhav, how long would it be taken for work experience to be completed pre-COVID? So most places that would offer work experience would do, say, a 1 to 2 week placement in the hospital. So it generally would be about 2 weeks, as I said, between August and December of each calendar year. Pippi, you've got a question. You're raising your hand at the moment.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. I was just wondering, so in our personal statement, when we're reflecting on work experience, obviously the characters are quite limited if we want to fit everything in. How can we still make our reflections really good but really concise? And what are the key bits we want to kind of pick out? If you could offer any advice on that.
Yeah, no, that's a really handy question. No, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Pippi. So it's a really good point. You are struggling with your word counts, with your 4,000 character word count. I think a really key thing to think about is when you're describing these experiences is keeping things, it's a really difficult balance, but it is keeping things concise. And it's also it's keeping things concise. It's picking out your strongest, it's really maximizing quality over quantity of what you talk about. And it's picking out your strongest examples. So when you're talking about, teamwork, so it's much like with the reflection point of saying, description. This was the experience. This is what I saw. This is what I learned. So saying things like, working in the hospital environment and viewing an MDT meeting showed me teamwork between a variety of healthcare roles, and showed me the importance of interprofessional working as a future doctor. I think in terms of getting the character count down, it really just takes a lot of drafting and trial and error. You'll find when you first write your personal statement, it's going to be much longer than the character limit, and that's to be expected. You're going to have a lot more that you're going to want to cram in than you'll be able to. But it comes with really careful fine tuning and making your phrasing more and more concise so that you can tune it down to the character limit. But I think it is still really important to keep the principles of reflection that we've talked about in this webinar to hand when you're writing, and make sure that you follow those, because you can always make things shorter later on. Does that answer your question?
The other thing to add to that is in the examples that Annie's given, the first one was listing the type of surgeries that you saw, which is a good example of something which you don't actually need, and is a good way to cut down on your word count.
Okay, thanks guys.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just working my way. I can see lots of questions coming in. I'm just working my way down through the list. So I've got down to Manol's question. Can you explain the different roles in an MDT? I might come back to that one at the end. That's quite a long question, Manol. I think to answer the best way you can answer your question would be if you go to the NHS Careers website. They have quite a lot of good information about different MDT roles that we've spoken about on my previous slide here. So they'll have brief descriptions about each of these healthcare roles and how they're involved in the multidisciplinary team. Let's work down a little bit further. So Madhav, you've asked, would work experience in a desired university secure a place in that university? Not necessarily. I think it does. It would show a degree of commitment that you're interested in studying in that university enough to seek to actively organize and seek a placement in that institution. I don't think it would guarantee you a place, but it would show a lot of positive attributes for sure. I hope that answers your question. Jay, you've asked, how would you maximize observing a GP consultation. So when you're observing a consultation, you need to think about the themes that I've mentioned in this webinar. If I go back to the previous slide. Yeah. So think about all of these. So think about all the skills that you're going to be seeing that GP do during their consultation, and exactly how they went about that. How did they show good communication? How did they show empathy to their patients? And I think that's where you're going to maximize and gain the most. If you've got opportunities to ask questions after watching the live consultation, then please ask lots of questions as well. That's going to be really important as well. You mentioned specifically about work experience. I did work experience in a pharmacy, but I didn't like it at all. So shall I not mention it? I think it is really, regardless of whether you enjoyed or didn't enjoy the work experience, if there was something that you learned from it, particularly in terms of healthcare roles and skills, I think it is important to mention. So I'll leave that up to you in answer to your question of mentioning a work experience that you didn't enjoy so much. Madhav, you've asked about whether Medsuccess webinars are classed as virtual work experience. So I wouldn't say that this webinar itself would be counted as a virtual work experience, but coming to some questions that other people have asked, I think that you could class talking to doctors or medical students or attending any our webinars on life as a medical student or life as a doctor, or similar sorts of sessions by other organizations. They could be counted as forms of work experience, because you are gaining an insight into medical career, the kind of skills that you need, but you're probably more importantly in those sorts of webinars going to get an idea into the current challenges that are facing the NHS and the challenges that face people that want to pursue a career in medicine, for sure. Would Be My Eyes be a type of volunteering that would be recognised? Erin is asking. I'm not actually aware of Be My Eyes. Can you expand a little bit on it?
So Be My Eyes, as far as I just to put in there, it's an app that links people who have significant visual difficulties with people who can see, and it allows them to act as their eyes when they're doing a specific activity or having something happen which they need sight for.
I think that sounds like a really good volunteer. It'd be more so a volunteering example, but that sounds like a really strong example of volunteering for sure, in terms of communication with someone else and showing caring as well. So definitely, yes, that would Be My Eyes would be a very good volunteering experience, Erin. Jay, you've asked about summer schools. I think, yes, summer schools can be handy for, an example of work experience, but it depends on the content. I think particularly if your summer school was related to science, you can spin it towards being helpful, or particularly if it was related to healthcare, that would be a really strong experience. Amy, is there a particular structure to reflective writing that you would recommend? So I quite like this idea of description, interpretation, and outcome. So describing what happened, interpreting what was learned and what was interesting, and then your outcome. And essentially the description is what happened, interpretation is I felt this was interesting, or I felt this way because of this. Then your outcome would be I learned about this. The other way that I quite like talking about reflective examples, particularly for interviews, is the STAR approach, if you've heard about it. So that involves situation, task, action, and result. So situation, similar to description, task, so the setting, the background, task is what you were doing, action is what you did, result is the outcome and what you learned from it. So that's another useful way to talk about reflective examples. Han, is speaking to a medical student class as a type of work experience? We've spoken about that already, although yes, not as strong as a physical or virtual work experience. it does give you a lot of really useful insight into studying at medical school and can be relevant as well. Erin, should we aim to get work experience from many different organisations? So I think it's more important about quality rather than quantity, as I've spoken about before. Yes, it can be important to get a variety of different opportunities, but it's more important what you're learning from these work experience opportunities rather than how much or how many that you're doing. And I would really strongly consider doing some volunteering. I think a long-term volunteering placement where you're actively participating can probably, you can probably learn and gain as much, if not a lot more than a more passive work experience, particularly virtually. Holly, even though it's not medically related, can you reflect upon how a non-healthcare related job also shows skills that would be helpful in the healthcare industry? So you can tell me yourself, a job such as waitressing or working in the food industry, what sort of skills do you show there?
Sort of caring for other people and being attentive and making sure everyone's just being caring for other people.
Yeah, exactly. So you're communicating with people, you're looking after people. Sometimes people might get angry or shout, and you're trying to manage people's concerns there. There's a lot of and there's all the team working as well, both as a team member, within people running a shift, and with your supervisors as well. So there's a lot of factors there, a lot of themes there where you're actively participating, that you'll be able to show, for sure. Pfizer, how can I get more unique reflections and experience? And you've asked, my reflections are quite detailed. How can I choose which ones to use in personal statements or discuss an interview? The second point we've spoken about a bit. It's really about, I would recommend having a little grid, thinking about the skills and themes that people are likely to ask at interview time, and thinking about the strongest examples that you have out of your work experience opportunities to talk about. Hopefully this webinar gives you some ideas of more virtual work experience ideas that you can take forward and do, that can be handy. Manuel, we'll put the links to the work experience chat sources back into the chat as well. I'm just having a quick read. Going back to the reflective slide for you, Asia. So, and to answer your question about what are the most necessary, should you know what would be the most necessary in your personal statement? Like, what are the sorts of things universities want to hear about? So universities want to hear that you understand what partaking in a medical career involves, the skill set that's involved, and that you understand some of the challenges as well. That you understand that a career in medicine is a long slog. It involves a number of years of training in medical school, a number of years of postgraduate training as well, with a lot of work on weekends and nights, and a lot of arduous work on your feet as well. And they want to just have an idea that they want you to understand that you recognize that, you recognize and understand that, but for you, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, and despite that, you can still see yourself wanting to pursue a career in medicine. They want to see that you're someone that's going to stick it out for the whole course, and that, given that they're planning to invest a lot of money into your training, and that you're not going to be someone, that you're someone that's less unlikely to drop out, although you can never predict things. That's what they're looking for, as well as someone that understands the skills, as I've mentioned, that are needed to be someone that understands the skills that are needed to be a good medical practitioner, and that you're someone that's trying to go out of their way to actively try and develop those skills, so has good potential during medical school. Hope that answers your question. Pippi, you raised your hand as well. What did you want to ask?
I'm not sure I understand.
That's okay. You asked about virtual volunteering, which I'm just going back to. So you've asked about virtual volunteering opportunities, and these are some of the examples that I've mentioned about already in this presentation, which I would recommend as the strongest opportunities at the moment, particularly for virtual volunteering. The other options, of course, would be, I think, particularly when lockdown is relaxed, but depending on what part of the country you're in, when things get relaxed, would be working in charity shops would be quite handy as well. So Jay.
Sorry, I was just going to ask very quickly about with virtual work experiences. I'm finding that I'm learning a lot of stuff quite passively, so I'm kind of just observing and I'm kind of reflecting on what I've seen and what I've learned. And I'm not really developing any skills per se because I'm not really there doing anything. Is that fine, or should I be commenting on kind of skills, except I don't feel like I'm developing any skills?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's hard when you're passively experiencing, particularly in the context of everything happening. And I guess that's a reason why, to help show that you're actively developing skill sets, either if you're doing some form of virtual volunteering or partaking in any organisations that you're involved with already, that should hopefully show that you're actively developing the skills that you're seeing in your virtual work experience that would make you a good doctor in the future. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Nice one. Mamina, we are planning to do some mock interviews, the format of which we're planning to organise in the next couple of weeks. We are potentially planning a second interview skills webinar, much like last week, in mid-December, but we'll confirm that nearer the time. Arushi, I'm going to bounce that question back to you. What skills do you think, or to anyone, let's answer Arushi's question as a group. What skills would you say can you develop by volunteering in a charity shop? And while you answer that question, I'm actually going to just copy the links that I've put in the chat. Yeah, exactly. So you can say, so I hope does that answer your question, Arishi? Well, you've answered your question anyway. There's lots of things with organisation, time management. There's lots of things that you can develop there. Yeah, cool. Jay, I'm going to come to your question in a moment. I'm just finishing up by just putting in a lot of the links that I've put into this webinar. So the first two links are specific work experience related details. The other bits are our official guide from the Medical Schools Council. And then I'm also going to put the other two links about University of Portsmouth. So yeah, sorry, Jay. I can see you've been asking quite a lot of questions. I've just been trying to make things fair and just answer questions for everyone. Emily, as we finish up, any other questions that anyone else would like to answer? Well, to ask at the moment. I would ask if you could fill out our feedback form for this session. That would be much appreciated. I think Emily's going to very kindly pop that into the chat as well. So if you could fill that in, that would be very handy. So, Jay, thanks, Emily. So your question was to elaborate on summer school work experience. We did practical stuff like learning to take a blood sample, how to measure someone's blood pressure, journey, carried out a role-playing presentation. How can you talk about community projects? So that summer school experience is very directly related to healthcare. There's a lot for you to talk about in terms of, I'm sure, what you've learned in terms of what skills you need to take forward in a career in healthcare and medicine. And why don't you try answering the question, or if you open it to the floor, your second point, how do you talk about community projects like carried out fundraising for charities to raise money? What skills does that show that are relevant to a future career in medicine? How about you tell me? Like I said, we're not trying to be passive here, we're trying to be active. So tell me, how does that show skill sets that would be good for a career in medicine? Yeah. So yeah, a lot of things have been mentioned that are relevant there by lots of people in the chat. So I hope that answers your question, Joe. Before we finish up, does anyone have any other questions?
There's a comment just been added about how you can link skills gained from sports teams.
Yep. Do you want to take this question in, Emily?
Yeah. So again, it's much the same as anything. Really, there's a huge part if it's a team sport of teamwork and communication. And again, commitment. If it's something you've been doing for a while, then obviously that shows that you're committed to something. And so again, going back to that list of qualities that Annie put up, you can link them to anything that you're doing, really. So within a team, you are communicating. It doesn't matter that it's not with patients or with customers. Between people, between your teams, you're communicating about what you're doing, about your practice. Even organizing sessions is communication. You've got empathy. When you're dealing with a team, there's always going to be issues, and that's evidence for empathetic approach to dealing with people. Technical skills, obviously, if you're doing a sport, you have to learn how to actually do the sport, and that does count as a technical skill and showing that you've progressed and that you are able to dedicate time to improving skills. If you're involved in the running of a club, for example, organizing events, dealing with the finances, sometimes that might be a way of showing data interpretation. And as with anything, there are always going to be issues and problems coming up, whether those are small ones about who to put on the field or issues arranging a venue, are all good opportunities to demonstrate problem solving. And so they don't have to be massive issues, they could be very little ones, but you can still demonstrate your learning from it. So I hope that's helped. So do we talk about achievements we've had in sports to back it up? It doesn't necessarily have to be a you've won a certain number of titles or anything like that. It can just be small achievements that you've how you've succeeded in whatever problem that is that you're talking about. It doesn't have to be you've won certain amounts. or even that you've won anything. It is about the process and the learning that you've had. So I mean, it's showing that you've just seen you've added like got to a national standard. That is an example of commitment and showing your dedication to something, but it's not a necessary requirement of it. If it's a team that you're involved in that just does local for fun activities, that's just that you can learn and show your learning just as much with that. Tutoring is a really good way of demonstrating volunteering and these skills that we've talked about. Tutoring is a really good example. So one question about being involved in open evenings for schools and induction days. Yeah, they're great for showing communication and kind of more organizational skills. Yeah, I think if you're doing tutoring, particularly if you're doing it on a weekly basis or you know, regular basis, that's a really good example. And so just have a sit down and think through, you know, look at those skills, you know, what things related to your tutoring you're showing there. But again, that's really good for communication, for commitment, problem solving and management skills. I think why, you know, so someone's just asked about, you know, why you're suitable to do medicine. That's something that you kind of have to really sit down and think about for yourself, because it's going to be a very personal answer for everyone. Kind of have a think about, you know, why do you want to do medicine? What is it about it that appeals to you? What things have you seen in your work experience or wider reading or talking to people who are doing it? You know, what things confirm it for you? What skills do you have, and what things have you done that demonstrate those skills? So it's a very personal question to answer. Personally, I sat down and just kind of made a mind map of everything that I could think of and tried to formulate that into sentences. So in terms of answering questions related to it, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with that. I think practice it with a friend or you know, other people who are applying, and try and, you know, think about what works best for you. I mean, the questions are often structured on a skill. So show us an example of where you demonstrated teamwork. So from that, I, you know, think about what examples you have and kind of go in by that way. So you're starting with the skill that you've shown. Can you use DOV being a DOV ambassador? Yep, again, that sounds like a very good example for commitment and communication management. Loads of good things to think about for that. Okay, any more questions at all, guys? If not, I think we might wrap up now. So to say, please do fill in our feedback form. We do have a read of those and we do look at all your answers. And I hope that you join us for the next few webinars as well. So next webinar is next Tuesday, which trying to remember which one that one is. Yeah, so next Tuesday, same time. You'll get an email about it later on in the week.
It's going to be on picking the right medical school.
There you go.
Right, sorry, last question. Like, how could you show you have good like data interpretation skills? Like, do you know how you've said like holistic management and all of that? How do you kind of show that?
So data interpretation can really be quite a range of things. If you have to deal with numbers at all, that could be a good way of showing it. You know, for example, if you're managing like a club membership, that's good data interpretation. So it's kind of a linked with anything where you're showing organizational skills, usually.
All right, thank you. And also with problem solving, how obviously it's not maths, but like how could you prove that?
So problem solving can be anything where there's been an issue, and that, say, it could be a large thing or it could be a small thing. It could be people, you know, if you're involved in a club and, you know, someone's not joining in as much, that could be a problem that you then describe, you know, how you solved it and what things you've learned from that. So it can, you don't have to think of it as a mathematical thing. It can be like interpersonal problems as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I think we're just about done. So yeah, I hope to see you in the next few weeks as well.